Since Elaine had already admitted to her own mistake and guaranteed that she would never do something like this again, Claire became soft-hearted, and she decided not to pursue the matter further. When they were both alone, Claire told Charlie, "Charlie, my mom is always like this. Please don't blame her too much. As long as she realizes her own mistake and is willing to turn over a new leaf, we should give her a second chance." What could Charlie say? After all, she was Claire's biological mother and his mother-in-law. Therefore, he could only smile as he said, "I understand, Claire. You don't have to worry about me. You can decide on this matter on your own. I'm your husband and she's my mother-in-law, so I won't blame her for anything she does." Claire nodded before she hugged Charlie gently and said, "Dear husband, I'm really grateful to you. If it weren't because of you, Mom and I wouldn't have been able to leave that place alive." Charlie smiled before he said, "Okay, don't mention it. You don't have to keep thanking me." Claire nodded before she said, "We should postpone moving out then. What do you think?" Even though Charlie really wanted to move out with Claire, he wanted to respect Claire's decision. Therefore, he smiled before he said, "I don't mind moving out, nor if we continue living here either. It doesn't matter that much to me." After that, Charlie seemed to recall something, and he said, "By the way, the renovation for the villa at Thompson First is almost done. After the renovation is completed, we can move into the villa as a family." Claire was a little overwhelmed, and she said, "That villa belongs to Mr. White after all. Wouldn't it be very troublesome for us if we've already moved in as a family, and he decides that he wants to take back the villa one day?" "It wouldn't be troublesome at all." Charlie smiled. "Zeke has already transferred the ownership of the villa to me. I'm now the legal owner of the villa, and he won't be able to take the villa back from me anymore. Besides that, we'd be able to lead a quieter and more peaceful life in the future. After all, if we moved into the huge villa, there would be several floors in the villa. We can live on the third floor while our parents can live on the second floor. This way, we will be able to meet them less, and we would have more freedom. What do you think?" Claire thought about it, and she felt that what Charlie said really made sense. She had always wanted to escape from the troubles of this family, but sometimes she felt that she did not have the rights to do so. After all, she was still her parents' biological child, so how could she possibly move out just like that? However, it was very difficult to deal with this kind of situation sometimes. Therefore, if they really moved into the villa, life would definitely be a lot easier. Everyone's bedroom would not be located on the same floor, and they could minimize any interference and have some free time to themselves. Claire nodded before she said to Charlie, "If that's the case, then we should move into the villa as soon as the renovations are complete." A villa was burning at the Riverside Villa at this time. The fire truck arrived at the scene, and it took them a long time to finally put out the fire. However, everything inside the villa had already been reduced to ashes. The firemen entered the site, and they noted that there were no human bodies or remains inside the villa, which proved that this fire did not cause any casualties at all. A fire with no casualties was naturally not worth any mention, so no one paid much attention to the sudden fire that burned down the whole villa. In fact, the reason why the firemen could not find any corpses or human remains was because Justin and Jason had already been reduced to ashes by Charlie's thunder order. Therefore, the remains of their ashes were fused with all the other objects in the room, and since the ashes were so fine, it was completely impossible for it to contain any DNA components at all. This was how both the father and son from the Grant family completely evaporated from this world. Everyone in the Grant family was very anxious at this time. They did not know where the father and son had gone, and no one knew about the horrible and terrifying plan that they had come up with to retaliate against Charlie. The villa that was burned down was owned by their family, but even though the villa was burned down to ashes, there were no casualties. Therefore, the Grant family thought that the father and son had gone missing. After that, the Grant family offered a cash reward of $5 million to anyone who had any information about Justin and Jason. They even posted photos of the two all around the city. However, no one could find the two persons who had disappeared into thin air. They left no traces or clues of their existence back in this world. At the same time, Kenneth, who had his manhood destroyed by Charlie, was waiting for Justin's phone call at home. Last night, he saw the pair of father and son pacing up and down the entrance of Douglas Serene World Clinic. It seemed as though the both of them were trying to light up Serene World Clinic with gasoline. It was then that Kenneth realized that he would be able to use these fools to his own advantage. He originally thought that he could fool both of them into getting rid of Douglas. After that, he would swap out Douglas' real medicine with the fake ones he had already prepared. As soon as he got his hands on Douglas' real medicine, he would be able to restore his manhood to its former glory. However, even though Justin said that he would call him today, he did not call him at all. This made Kenneth a little anxious. He did not know Justin's name, and he could only keep dialing the phone number that had been given to him. No matter how many times he called, the call could not be connected because it was not in the service area. The more he could not reach Justin, the more irritated Kenneth was. Lady Wilson, Christopher, Hannah, their daughter, Wendy, and son, Harold, were all standing at the side as they looked carefully at Kenneth, who was sitting on the sofa at this time. "Damn it! This dog! He's really pissing me off! He isn't trustworthy at all!" After that, Kenneth dialed Justin's phone number again, and he found that the call was still not going through. At this time, Kenneth had a really gloomy expression on his face. He felt that he was on the verge of collapse. Without his manhood, he was nothing more than a living eunuch, so he could not wait to get his hands on Douglas' miraculous medicine. However, he knew all about Douglas and his abilities. Therefore, he did not dare to provoke him directly. When Wendy saw that Kenneth was getting more and more irritated, she hurriedly stepped forward before she said, "My dear, what's wrong with you? Who are you trying to call? Why are you so irritated right now?" At this time, Kenneth replied with a black face, "I'm calling a bastard, but I don't know his name." Everyone in the living room exchanged glances with one another. They could not help but wonder why Kenneth would want to make a phone call to someone whose name he did not even know. At this time, Harold suddenly received a text message from an Oris Hill group chat. The owner of the group chat posted a message stating, "Jason and his father, Justin, are both missing. The Grant family is offering a cash reward of $5 million to anyone who has any clues or information about them. If anyone has any information about the father and son, please go and get the money so that you can buy everyone a drink." Immediately afterwards, the owner of the group sent a photograph of the father and son to the group chat. Harold muttered in surprise, "Wow, how could Jason and Justin suddenly disappear?" Wendy also asked in surprise, "Brother, isn't Jason the same guy that became a cripple because Charlie threw him out of the hospital window 2 days ago?" "Yes." Harold continued speaking. "Both of them went missing today." After hearing their conversation, Kenneth immediately thought of the father and son who were carrying gasoline in their hands last night. He quickly asked, "Who is this Jason that you've just mentioned? Do you have a picture of him?" "Yes." Harold hurriedly handed his cell phone over to Kenneth as he said, "Look, Chairman Wilson, these are the two who have disappeared mysteriously today." When Kenneth saw the picture of the father and son, he suddenly exclaimed, "Damn it! Damn it! What happened? They were going to get rid of Douglas today, but the mentally retarded father and son suddenly disappeared today? Could Charlie be the mastermind behind their disappearance?" When Kenneth thought about the fact that the disappearance of the father and son of the Grant family might have something to do with Charlie, Kenneth could not help but feel very nervous. If Charlie could really let the father and son evaporate from the face of this world, then he was afraid that Charlie would also get rid of him. Moreover, since the father and son had already disappeared, he would not be able to get his hands on Douglas' magic medicine. After all, there would not be any substitute for a dead man, and he should not do anything to provoke Douglas at this time. As everyone was keeping silent, Lady Wilson suddenly looked at Kenneth in a flattering manner as she said in a humble manner, "Mr. Wilson, should we head to one of the big hospitals in East Cliff instead? Perhaps you'd be able to find a cure for your illness then." Kenneth was the final life-saving straw for the entire Wilson family, and Lady Wilson felt even more anxious than him at this time. If Kenneth could not restore his manhood, the Wilson family would definitely miss out on the remaining $70 million that he had already promised to invest in the Wilson Group. "Yes, Mr. Wilson. Even though Dr. Simmons is a reputable and famous man, he's always hanging around that piece of trash, Charlie. I believe that there would definitely be other genius doctors who are more capable than him. Christopher also chimed in because he wanted to get into Kenneth's good books. As soon as their voices fell, the expression on Kenneth's face became even uglier. He gritted his teeth as he said, "Shut up! I know what that bastard Dr. Simmons is capable of. If he is unwilling to treat me, then it would be useless for me to go to any hospitals in Eastcliff." At this time, Wendy anxiously said, "Kenneth, is Dr. Simmons the only genius doctor in the entire Orris Hill? Should we try looking for someone else instead?" Wendy did not have any love or affection for Kenneth. However, she felt that she had already paid such a high price, but it seems as though she did not get much benefit at all. How could she be content with this? Christopher suddenly thought of something, and he quickly said, "Chairman Wilson, didn't you say that you have a friend who runs a pharmaceutical factory? Do you want to contact that person and see if he'd be able to help you out?" The expression on Kenneth's face changed immediately as soon as he heard Christopher's words. He had been so focused on getting Douglas magic medicine that he had forgotten all about that. The Weaver family in Orris Hill owns a large pharmaceutical company, and they were one of the most reputable names in the pharmaceutical industry. Moreover, Kenneth had a very good relationship with the young lord of the Weaver family. The two of them often fooled around together. Now, he would probably be Kenneth's last hope in Orris Hill. The young lord of the Weaver family was also a devil just like him. If Kenneth were to ask for his help, he would have to start from this aspect. At this time, Kenneth looked at Wendy with eyes filled with dissatisfaction and disgust. He had already spent $15 million for this woman, and he only managed to spend 2 or 3 nights with her before he became a eunuch. This was really one of the most expensive women that he had ever played with. Since he had already lost his manhood, he could no longer engage in any intimate moments with Wendy. Therefore, it was useless for him to continue keeping her by his side. It would be better for him to bring her over to the young lord of the Weaver family so that she could please him instead. As he thought about this, Kenneth looked at Wendy before he smiled and said, "Wendy, make sure that you dress up nicely tomorrow. I'm bringing you along with me to see a friend." It was rare for Kenneth to smile and talk to her in such a nice manner these few days. Therefore, Wendy was overjoyed, and she nodded in a hurry. She did not know what was going through Kenneth's dirty mind at this time. The next day, the news of the disappearance of the father and son of the Grant family continued spreading around the city. However, Claire and Elaine did not pay too much attention to the matter because Charlie had already told them that the father and son had absconded out of fear that they would be punished for their crime. Since they were absconding, it was only natural for them to disappear from the face of this world. Kenneth contacted the young lord of the Weaver family in advance before he brought Wendy with him to one of the exclusive private rooms in Orris Hill later that evening, as he anxiously waited for the arrival of the other party. Wendy dressed up very beautifully today. She wore a black figure-hugging dress that was worth over $100,000. The dress revealed her beautiful curves and figure, and she put on heavy makeup tonight. Even though she was not as beautiful as Claire or Warnia, she could easily get most men excited after putting on some makeup and dressing up in some revealing clothing. When she heard that she was going to meet the young lord of the Weaver family, she was also a little excited. Although the Weaver family was not one of the top families in Orris Hill, it was still a much stronger and more powerful family compared to the Wilson family. Now that the Wilson family was still struggling, Wendy also hoped that she would be able to get to know more wealthy and powerful people. If she was fortunate enough, she might have the opportunity to bring some improvements and business to the Wilson family. Kenneth and Wendy continued waiting in the private room for a short while when someone suddenly pushed the door open. At this time, a middle-aged man dressed in an Armani suit walked into the room. The man had his hair combed to the side, and he looked very wretched. He was also wearing a Patek Philippe watch on his wrist. A man who looked about 1 or 2 years younger than him was carrying a bag in his hand as he followed behind him. He looked like his assistant. Kenneth stood up before he smiled and said, "Brother Jeffrey, come and have a seat inside." The middle-aged man smiled before he said, "Chairman Wilson, you're such a busy man and you've not visited Orris Hill for the longest time. What brings you here today? I'm also really flattered that you've actually asked me out." As he spoke, Jeffrey suddenly saw Wendy, who was sitting next to Kenneth, and his eyes lit up immediately. Jeffrey smiled before he said, Wow, Kenneth. Who's this beautiful girl beside you? Why didn't you introduce her to me? Kenneth pulled Wendy over to him as he said with a smile on his face, Brother Jeffrey, let me introduce you to her. This is my niece, Wendy. Oh, it turns out that she's your niece. It's no wonder that she's so beautiful. When Jeffrey heard that Wendy was Kenneth's niece, he smiled and nodded gently. At this time, his eyes flashed with greed as he reached out his hand towards Wendy and said, Miss Wendy, I'm so lucky to meet you today. At this time, Kenneth said to Wendy, Wendy, this is Jeffrey Weaver, the general manager of Weaver Pharmaceuticals. Weaver Pharmaceuticals is a well-known pharmaceutical company in Oris Hill, and they are doing very well in the pharmaceutical industry. Wendy hurriedly shook hands with the other party as she said, Hello, Mr. Weaver. Jeffrey took off his suit jacket before he threw it towards the man who was standing behind him at this time. The assistant missed his throw and the suit jacket fell on the ground. There was a look of dissatisfaction in Jeffrey's eyes as he glared at the man before he started cursing at him. Garbage! You can't even do something as simple as this? I'm sorry, elder brother. This is all my fault. Please don't get angry. The other man's face turned pale and he quickly picked up the suit jacket on the ground before he wiped off the dust on it. Jeffrey got even more upset and disgusted after hearing the man's words. He walked towards the man and slapped him across the face before he said, Liam, how many times must I tell you that you're just an illegitimate child? Who gave you the rights to call me your brother? I am not your brother. Get out of here and wait for me outside. Even though Liam was slapped across the face, he did not dare to refute or retaliate at all. Instead, he nodded in a humble manner, as though he was already used to this kind of treatment. After that, he slowly retreated as he said, All right, I understand, elder brother. After he was done speaking, Liam hurried out of the private room. What a disappointment! Damn it! As Jeffrey continued cursing, Kenneth suddenly asked, Brother Jeffrey, is that your brother? Jeffrey replied coldly, He's just an illegitimate child. He isn't my brother. After that, Jeffrey turned around to look at Wendy before he asked, Miss Wendy, you're so beautiful. May I know if you have a boyfriend? As soon as Wendy heard his question, she did not answer, but she looked at Kenneth with an awkward expression on her face. She did not dare to say that she had no boyfriend because she was Kenneth's lover. However, she did not tell any outsiders that she was Kenneth's lover. After all, Kenneth had a family of his own. She did not want to ruin or break his family apart. If that was the case, and if she said that she was his lover, then she would definitely cause more trouble for him. If that happened, she would only be making things difficult for herself. Unexpectedly, Kenneth was actually very straightforward at this time. He did not bother to hide the truth, and he simply smiled before he told Jeffrey, Brother Jeffrey, let me tell you the truth. Wendy is actually my lover. However, I hope you'll keep this to yourself and not tell anyone else about this. Jeffrey felt very regretful at this time. He initially thought that Wendy was Kenneth's niece. Who would have known that it was just a cover-up and she was in fact just his lover? Even though he was interested in Wendy, he would not dare to steal Kenneth's woman. Therefore, he could only dispel all these thoughts in his heart. Kenneth naturally saw the look of greed in his eyes, and he smiled to himself as he continued chatting with Jeffrey. At this time, Kenneth deliberately asked Jeffrey, By the way, Brother Jeffrey, how has your father's health been recently? Jeffrey sighed before he said, Not that good. The old man had partied too much when he was younger, and he's paying the price for his actions now. Therefore, his health is suffering a lot now. Kenneth asked again, I heard that the old man used to have a lot of romantic relationships in the past? Of course he had plenty of them, Jeffrey replied helplessly. Don't you know that my father was just like me? He was very handsome and young back then, and he would always coax and spend the night with all sorts of women whenever he went out to buy medicinal herbs and medicine outside. He would always find the opportunity to sleep around whenever he could do so. As far as I know, he had more than 20 lovers in the past. That's even more than I have. Wow, Kenneth exclaimed immediately. Your father was really such a womanizer when he was young? Jeffrey nodded before he said in a helpless manner, Otherwise, how else would I have a half-brother who is an illegitimate child? In fact, my father has several other illegitimate children out there, but they're all daughters. When my grandfather found out that my father had an illegitimate son out there, he insisted on bringing him back to the Weaver family home because he said that a son of the Weaver family should not be left to suffer outside. After that, Jeffrey continued explaining, I'm not the only one who doesn't want to look at this bastard child. My father doesn't even want to see him at all. However, there's nothing else we can do. Since he has already recognized his ancestors and since my grandfather was the one who invited him into the Weaver family, we have no choice but to keep him with us. He usually does some menial tasks for us. Kenneth had always known that the Weaver family had two sons. The eldest son was none other than Jeffrey Weaver, while the younger son was the illegitimate child, Liam Weaver. Liam was a result of his father's romantic relationship with one of his lovers a very long time ago. However, even though the Weaver family had already taken him into their own home, no one knew who he was, and not many people had seen him before. It seemed as though Liam really grew up in a very tough and miserable environment. At this time, Kenneth suddenly asked out of curiosity, By the way, Brother Jeffrey, since your father used to be a womanizer in the past, he must have an extraordinary ability in that area. Did he use any secret tricks or medicine? Jeffrey nodded before he smiled and said, How did you know? My father really had a secret. He accidentally stumbled upon it when he was out on a trip when he was much younger. The medicine apparently works to strengthen and nourish the kidneys, thus greatly improving a man's ability to perform in that area. Seriously? Kenneth asked in surprise. Then, do you still have that recipe? Jeffrey said, What should I say about this medicine? When he was younger, my dad used it for about 20 to 30 years. It seems to be really useful. I heard that my father could actually perform more than 10 times in a single night when he was out buying medicinal herbs and ingredients in the past. People even gave him the nickname Weaver 14 times. Speaking of this, Jeffrey sighed as he said, I was initially thinking of utilizing this prescription for mass production later. However, after analyzing the components of the medication, the researcher found out that this medicine causes kidney and liver toxicity. Just look at my old man. He's only in his early 60s, but his livers and kidneys are almost completely exhausted. The doctor said that he'll only be able to live for another 2 to 3 years at most. Kenneth's originally delightful face suddenly became very heavy. Even though it was very important for him to regain his manhood, his life was even more important. He should not risk his own life just so that he could continue fooling around with women, right? When Jeffrey saw the sudden change in his expression, he asked in a curious manner, Chairman Wilson, are you facing any unspeakable difficulties now? Kenneth had a helpless expression on his face before he said, You're right, Brother Jeffrey. I'm a living eunuch now. I can't do anything at all. I paid a visit to the hospital and the doctor said there's no way for him to help me at all. Therefore, you have to help me. After that, he hurriedly asked, Would it be too toxic if I used the medicine that your old man used just once or twice? Could you let me try the medicine for myself? Jeffrey quickly replied, Brother, I wouldn't advise you to try that medicine at all. It wouldn't be worth it at all if you harmed your own body in the end. After that, Jeffrey continued speaking. My family is currently undergoing research to conduct further studies on this prescription. We hope to make an improvement to it. If we succeed in our research, we won't only be able to strengthen the male masculinity, but it also has a strong restoration and repairing effect on a man's ability. Really? Kenneth asked excitedly. That's great! When will the medicine be released? At this time, Jeffrey replied, However, we're still short of one medicinal herb. In order to complete the medicine, we'll have to wait for the Chinese Medicine Expo that will be held in 2 days' time in order to be able to buy the medicinal herbs. Kenneth was overjoyed. 2 days was nothing at all. If he could be completely cured and regain his manhood, he did not even mind waiting another 2 years. Kenneth hurriedly said, Brother Jeffrey, would you mind selling me the medicine after it is completed? I really need it. How could it not be a necessity? He was now a living eunuch. If he really lost his manhood, then he might as well cut it off. Jeffrey was placed in a tough spot, and he sighed as he said, It's not that I don't want to help you, brother. The medicinal herbs used in this medicine are really very precious. We can only produce 1 set of this medicine in the early trials. After that, Jeffrey glanced at Wendy before he smiled and said, However, it isn't entirely impossible for me to help you. How could Kenneth possibly not know what was running through Jeffrey's mind at this time? He showed a smile that every man would understand before he said, "Wendy, from now on, you'll be Brother Jeffrey's woman. Thank him on my behalf and make sure to serve him as well as you served me. Do you understand?" When Jeffrey heard Kenneth's words, he was suddenly very excited. He had already longed for something to happen with this beautiful woman as soon as he saw Wendy. However, he was a little disappointed when he heard that Wendy was Kenneth's niece. Unexpectedly, Wendy turned out to be Kenneth's lover instead. Moreover, Kenneth also directly pushed her into his arms in order to get the medicine from him. He did not have to put in any effort at all. Wendy felt a little unwilling inside. She hoped that she could continue to become Kenneth's lover, and she hoped that Kenneth could introduce her to more wealthy and powerful people. This way, with the help of Kenneth's connections, she would be able to get more contacts and gradually become a very powerful woman in Oris Hill. At that time, not only would she be able to obtain a lot of benefits for herself, but she would also be able to bring about a lot of benefits to Wilson Group. Moreover, Wendy would also become a very prominent leader and figure of Wilson Group. Unexpectedly, she was nothing but a tool to Kenneth. In an effort to obtain the medicine to regain his manhood, he was so willing to hand her over to Jeffrey just like that. She wanted to continue being Kenneth's lover, and she wanted to continue living an upper-class life. However, she did not want to be a plaything shared among the upper-class men. As soon as people hear about her reputation as a plaything, then she would never be able to marry into a wealthy and prestigious family in her lifetime. Therefore, she quickly took Kenneth's hand before she said, "Kenneth, I love you so much and I want to be with you. I don't ever want to leave your side." Kenneth was very upset with Wendy at this time because he felt that out of all the women that he had played with before, Wendy was the least cost-effective one. Therefore, he was anxious to get rid of Wendy now in exchange for one last benefit. Giving Wendy to Jeffrey would be the best decision that he could make today. After all, he had already lost his manhood, so he could only look at Wendy, but he could not make use of her at all. However, if he gave Wendy up to Jeffrey and if he managed to find a cure for his illness, then he could continue looking for other women in the future. Therefore, he looked at Wendy with a cold expression on his face before he said, "Don't play around with me now. If I ask you to accompany Brother Jeffrey, then you'd better listen to me and accompany him. Why are you spouting so much nonsense now?" Wendy had an aggrieved expression on her face as tears fell down her cheeks. She started crying as she said, "Kenneth, didn't you get together with me because you liked me? If you really liked me, then why would you give me to someone else?" Jeffrey felt a little uncomfortable now, and he said, "Oh, Chairman Wilson, since Miss Wendy has such a deep affection for you, then please don't make things difficult for her anymore." At this time, Kenneth raised his hand before he gave Wendy a slap as he said, "You're just one of the women I'm fooling around with. If I ask you to do something, then you'd better obey me and get it done immediately. If you refuse to accompany Brother Jeffrey today, I'll withdraw my investment from Wilson Group, and I'll make sure that the Wilson family goes bankrupt immediately. After that, I also want you to return me the money that I gave to you. You should know what would happen to the Wilson family if I choose to withdraw my investment." Wendy was stunned when she heard Kenneth's words, and a sense of humiliation instantly surged in her heart. What was the use of feeling humiliated? Could she turn down Kenneth's request just because she felt humiliated? It was very simple for her to reject Kenneth's request. She could just say that she would not do it. But what would happen after she rejected his request? After turning down his request, everything would return to the way it was. The Wilson family would have to file for the bankruptcy of Wilson Group, and her dream of being a socialite would be completely shattered. Therefore, Wendy could only force a smile and said, I agree. I promise to take good care of Mr. Weaver." Kenneth sneered before he said, "I'm glad you know your own place." After that, he pushed Wendy into Jeffrey's arm before he smiled and said, "Make sure that you satisfy Mr. Weaver tonight." Jeffrey hugged Wendy excitedly before he smiled and said, "Wendy, I'll get a hotel room and we can get to know each other properly tonight." Wendy quietly wiped the tears off her face, and she was filled with resentment at this time. She was the young lady of the Wilson family, and she was once sought after by countless numbers of people. She used to be so haughty and arrogant. When she was looking for a boyfriend, she would not even look at a guy if he was not part of the rich second generation of a wealthy and powerful family. However, who would have expected her to end up in this state today after she had exhausted all of her resources? After she was abandoned by her fiancé, Gerald, she became Kenneth's lover. Unexpectedly, Kenneth simply regarded her as a tool and plaything that he could just throw to Jeffrey. Who would Jeffrey push her to after he got tired of her then? At this time, she could not help but think of her cousin, Claire. Claire had never put some much thought into men. Moreover, Claire had never been in any relationship before, and she married Charlie without any hesitation at all. However, even though Charlie was just a worthless piece of trash, he would never allow her to be insulted in this manner. In contrast, she might not necessarily be a winner. Jeffrey hugged Wendy tightly in his arms as he said to Kenneth with a wry expression on his face, "Don't worry, Kenneth. I'll send you the medicine to restore your manhood as soon as we have fully gathered the prescription for the medication." "Fantastic," Kenneth replied with a smile. He was very relieved at this time. "I will wait for your good news with peace of mind, then." Jeffrey nodded before he looked at the time on his watch. He felt very anxious and excited to spend time alone with Wendy. Therefore, he smiled at Kenneth before he said, "Kenneth, it's getting late. Why don't we call it a night then?" Kenneth knew that Jeffrey could not wait to spend the night together with Wendy. He could not help but feel a little envious at this time. However, he nodded in a generous manner before he smiled and said, "All right then, let's call it a night. Both of you can leave first." After that, Kenneth looked at Wendy before he said, "Wendy, make sure that you satisfy and serve Mr. Weaver well. Do you understand?" Wendy nodded, and she could only say, "Yes, I understand." That night, Wendy became Jeffrey's lover. Even though Wendy was deeply disgusted with spending the night with a different man, Jeffrey was very amazed and pleased with her performance. That night, Jeffrey felt as though he had found his youth again because of Wendy. Therefore, after having sexual intercourse with Wendy, Jeffrey hugged her before he said, "Wendy, you no longer need to accompany that old man Kenneth anymore. You should just follow me and stay by my side in a steadfast manner, and I'll make sure you lead a good life." Wendy finally felt a little better after listening to Jeffrey's words. If Jeffrey could provide her with a better life, then it would not be a bad idea for her to stick by his side. Even though he was not as rich as Kenneth, he was much younger than Kenneth. Moreover, Jeffrey did not seem like the kind of man who would casually give her away to someone else. Early the next morning, news of the disappearance of the father and son from the Grant family continued festering. At this time, the Grant family had already raised the cash reward to $10 million. Many of the young men and punks on the street were all looking for the father and son because they were all hoping to get rich overnight. However, it was a pity that the father and son had already been wiped out from the face of the earth. After having her breakfast, Claire went to the studio and Jacob went for his Antique Association meeting because he had been spending some time studying antiques with some of the masters there recently. As for Elaine, even though she was almost frightened to death yesterday, she had already put on heavy makeup to play mahjong today. Charlie was home alone and he was mopping the floor when he suddenly received a phone call from Warnia, the eldest daughter of the Song family. Charlie answered the phone as he continued mopping the floor. Warnia's gentle voice sounded over the phone and she asked in a respectful manner, "Mr. Wade, are you at home now?" Charlie asked, "Why are you looking for me?" Warnia smiled slightly before she said, "Well, the Song family has invested in a high-end entertainment club and I want to give you an all-access Supreme VIP membership card. I'm waiting outside your house now." Charlie replied in a casual manner, "All right then, you can come in. I'm home." Warnia hurriedly replied, "That's great. I will come over now." Charlie hung up the phone after that. A few minutes later, Warnia rang his doorbell. As soon as he opened the door, Charlie's eyes lit up immediately. Warnia was wearing a long black evening gown, and it was a very tightly fitted dress which showed off her thin waist and beautiful curves perfectly. Her long and fair legs shone like a beautiful piece of jade under her dress. Coupled with her glamorous and elegant face, Warnia really looked very beautiful and exquisite. Charlie could not help but take a few more looks at Warnia because she was so beautiful today. "Mr. Wade." In fact, Warnia had intentionally put on makeup and a beautiful dress before she came here today. She could not help but feel very happy when she saw Charlie staring intensely at her. Charlie nodded before he said, "Please come in and have a seat." After they sat down in the living room, Warnia took out a VIP card made out of pure platinum before she handed it over to Charlie in a respectful manner. "Mr. Wade, this is the All-Access Supreme VIP membership card for Glorious Club. I only have one of this card made, and you are the only owner of this platinum card. This is just one of my gestures to show my appreciation for you. You can pay a visit to Glorious Club whenever you want to, and you'll be able to enjoy free privileges for a lifetime." The Glorious Club had just opened, and it was a hot topic of discussion among the upper-class society in Orris Hill lately. Since it was a high-end entertainment club opened by the Song family, the overall investment was very high, and it took several years before the club was finally completed. Glorious Club could be regarded as the top high-end business club in Orris Hill. Many of the wealthy and powerful figures would also gather in this club because it was the Song family's business. The more such wealthy and powerful figures gathered here, the more people wanted to talk about businesses, collaborations, and partnership contracts at this business club. Therefore, even before the Glorious Club officially opened for business, it was sought after by countless people, and everyone wanted to become a member of the Glorious Club. However, in order to ensure that it retained its status and reputation as a high-end business and entertainment club, there was a very strict threshold for membership of this club. The Glorious Club membership was divided into 4 different levels, namely the Classic membership, the Silver membership, the VIP membership, and the VIP Gold membership. As for the All-Access Supreme VIP membership card that Warnia had given to Charlie, it was one of a kind, and the public did not know about its existence at all. Among these membership levels, the lowest ordinary Classic membership fee was $1 million, the Silver membership fee $5 million, and the VIP membership fee more tens of millions of dollars. If anyone wanted to become a VIP Gold member, they would have to be a patriarch with family assets worth tens of billions. Otherwise, it would be completely impossible. Charlie had no interest in this kind of matters, but he did not want to turn down Warnia goodwill. Therefore, he took the All-Access Supreme VIP membership card in his hand before he smiled and thanked Warnia for her kind gesture. After that, he placed the membership card into his pocket. At this time, Warnia looked at Charlie, and she hesitated for a moment before she spoke up in an awkward manner. "Mr. Wade, I actually have another pathetic request. I wonder if you'd be able to fulfill my request for me?" Charlie replied lightly, "Tell me about it." Warnia hurriedly replied, "Mr. Wade, our family has invested more than $1 billion in Glorious Club, and it is regarded as a relatively large investment for our family. I am afraid of us making any mistakes. Therefore, I hope you'll be able to come and help me take a look at the club to see if the Feng Shui of the club is good. If there are any problems, I'd like to stop any disaster from happening before it's too late." Warnia was a little nervous at this time because she did not know whether Charlie would agree to her request. Therefore, she could only stare anxiously at Charlie with her big and bright eyes. Charlie smiled faintly as soon as he heard Warnia's words. The Song family had already performed well, and Warnia had always been very loyal to him. Moreover, Warnia even came to his house personally to ask for his help, and she was also very polite and respectful towards him. So Charlie felt that it would not hurt for him to go over to take a look at her club. Therefore, he nodded before he said, "If that's the case, then I'll come and take a look at the club with you." Warnia hurriedly replied, "Thank you, Mr. Wade. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to help someone like me. My car is parked outside and we can leave any time you want. When would it be convenient for you?" Charlie replied, "We can leave now. I would like to see how your club is doing." Warnia was overjoyed, and she hurriedly followed Charlie out of the house in a respectful manner. A short while later, Warnia Rolls-Royce stopped at the entrance of Glorious Club. The Glorious Club was located at one of the most prosperous areas in Orris Hill. In fact, the Song family had already started this project a few years ago, and it had only recently been completed. The club was designed by a few top domestic architects and interior designers in the country. The decoration style of the exterior of the club was not just very trendy, but it was also extremely luxurious. As soon as the car stopped at the entrance, a waiter quickly opened the door before Warnia and Charlie got out of the car. After getting out of the car, Warnia said respectfully to Charlie, "Mr. Wade, please follow me." Charlie nodded before he looked at the facade of the entire club. The exterior of the glorious club looked very rich and magnificent, and there was a trace of nobility in the luxurious design of the club. The two white marble stone pillars had dragons carved all over them, and it was very lifelike and daunting. Charlie realized that from the moment he stepped into the club, the floor was covered with a layer of handmade Arabian wool carpet. The kind of wool carpet cost tens of thousands of dollars per square meter, and the entire hall was probably thousands of square meters large. Therefore, the amount of money they had spent on the wool carpet alone was probably tens of millions of dollars. Warnia walked by Charlie's side in a respectful manner as she pointed at the walls around the hall that was tens of meters in height. After that, she told Charlie, "Mr. Wade, these murals are all world-class cultural treasures, with each one of these murals worth tens of millions of dollars." Charlie nodded before he said, "There's a country in the Middle East called Abu Dhabi. The Grand Mosque there also has this sort of decoration and feel to it. However, I feel that the decoration and interior design of this club is just right and not religious at all." "Yes," Warnia said in a careful manner. "After all, I know that many people in our country are atheists, and we aren't used to promoting too much feudal superstitions. Therefore, in designing the club, we've tried to avoid all sorts of religious and cultural styles from the very beginning." After she was done speaking, Warnia pointed at the very huge crystal chandelier that was hanging 10 meters above them. The crystal chandelier was not only very huge in size, but it was also very bright, and it made the whole room look as though it was daytime with all the bright lights. Warnia continued speaking. "Mr. Wade, this crystal chandelier is made out of natural crystals, and it weighs about 8.8 tons. The Song family managed to purchase this crystal chandelier only after putting in a lot of effort and using many of our connections to get it from Europe. After that, we specially assembled it in Austria before airlifting it to Orus Hill." Charlie replied, "For all businesses to prosper, it is very important for the lights in the place of business to be bright and not too dark. The dimmer the light, the more it would affect the feng shui of your business. Therefore, you should never save money on lights." Warnia nodded before she said, "Thank you for your reminder, Mr. Wade. I'll definitely keep it in mind." After that, Warnia smiled before she said, "Mr. Wade, the top floor of the club isn't open to the public. Aside from members of the Song family, you're the only one who can go up to the top floor of the club since you are the holder of the All-Access Supreme VIP membership card. Why don't we go ahead and take a look at the top floor now?" Charlie nodded slightly. "Okay, sure.